Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world full of connection, texts, calls, likes, and follows, and yet there are moments that leave us feeling more alone than ever before. Have you ever found yourself wondering why someone you cared for suddenly became distant? Why a man who once seemed close, attentive, and present starts ignoring you without a word, without an explanation? Today, I don't want to give you just answers. I want to help you understand the why behind the behavior. Because when we understand human nature, how people retreat when they're overwhelmed, how fear, ego, or emotional immaturity can mask as indifference, we begin to reclaim our power. This speech is not about blame. It's about clarity, it's about healing, and most importantly, it's about learning how to stand stronger even when someone else steps back. So let's begin, because when we stop chasing explanations, we start discovering ourselves. When a man begins to distance himself from you and suddenly becomes unresponsive or emotionally unavailable, it's natural to internalize that behavior and assume that something is wrong with you. The mind begins to question, did I do something wrong? Am I not enough? What changed? But the truth is, distance is often a reflection of his internal struggle, not your worth. Men, just like women, carry emotional baggage, wounds from past relationships, pressure from societal expectations, fear of vulnerability, or even personal identity crises they haven't yet acknowledged. When these internal battles grow loud, many men respond by pulling away. It's not because you're lacking. It's because they're overwhelmed by the noise inside them and haven't learned how to process it while remaining emotionally present with someone else. You see, most people are never taught how to sit with discomfort, especially emotional discomfort. Some men, instead of facing their emotional uncertainty, choose avoidance. It feels easier to withdraw than to have a difficult conversation. It feels safer to ignore than to admit they feel lost, insecure, or unsure of what they want. The emotional tools necessary for vulnerability, honesty, accountability, openness are not always well developed. So instead of leaning in, they lean out. And here's the part that's difficult to accept but empowering to understand. Their behavior is about them, not you. The moment someone chooses silence over communication, distance over connection, avoidance over truth, it reveals more about their capacity to navigate relationships than about your capacity to be loved. Internalizing their actions as a verdict on your value is a trap. It keeps you in a cycle of self-doubt and overanalyzing something that was never within your control to begin with. You may remember moments when he was present, kind, engaged, even deeply connected. And now that he's withdrawn, it feels like a rejection of all those shared experiences. But the withdrawal doesn't erase those moments. It only reveals that his ability to maintain emotional consistency was conditional, possibly on how much emotional pressure he could handle before he began to unravel. This is why it's so important not to measure your worth by someone else's ability to stay. If someone lacks the emotional tools to face themselves, they will never be able to face you honestly, and you cannot fix, force, or fight your way into someone's emotional readiness. That's a journey they have to take alone, but here's what you can do. Shift your focus inward. Ask yourself why you seek answers from someone who is unwilling to offer them. Ask why your peace depends on a person who isn't showing up. When you recognize that someone's emotional distance stems from their internal storm, you begin to free yourself from the false belief that you were the storm's cause. The moment you stop blaming yourself for someone else's silence, you reclaim your strength. You begin to set emotional boundaries, not as a defense mechanism, but as a declaration of self-respect. You stop trying to win love and instead start learning to receive it from people who are capable of giving it freely and fully. Emotional distance doesn't always mean lack of care. It often means lack of capacity, and it's not your job to shrink, bend, or wait to prove you're worthy of closeness. You already are. Someone else's silence doesn't diminish your value. If anything, it should amplify your understanding that you deserve presence, not confusion, consistency, not withdrawal, communication, not avoidance. So when a man distances himself and ignores you, remind yourself, this is a mirror into his inner world, not a reflection of your shortcomings. Let his silence speak for itself, and let your response come from a place of strength, not insecurity. That's where true growth begins. Silence is often misunderstood as strength. In many cases, especially when a man distances himself and ignores you, silence is mistaken for confidence or emotional control. But more often than not, this kind of silence is not strength. It's emotional immaturity in disguise. When someone refuses to communicate, it doesn't necessarily mean they are being calm or collected. It can actually mean the opposite. Silence can be a defense mechanism, a way to avoid accountability, vulnerability, or the discomfort of confrontation. Rather than expressing what they truly feel or addressing an issue directly, emotionally immature individuals retreat into silence, believing that avoidance will somehow make the problem disappear. It doesn't. It only builds confusion, resentment, and emotional disconnection. An emotionally mature person understands that communication, even when it's difficult, is necessary for trust and connection. They know that relationships require honesty, even when it feels uncomfortable. On the other hand, emotional immaturity avoids discomfort at all costs. It hides behind ghosting, ignoring messages, or giving one-word answers. It pulls away without explanation, hoping the silence will be enough to send a message without ever having to speak the truth. This kind of behavior can leave the other person in a state of emotional chaos. You're left wondering what you did wrong, what changed, and why there's suddenly a wall between you and someone who once showed interest or affection. And that's where the real damage of immature silence begins. It invites you to take responsibility for something that was never your burden to carry. It makes you question your self-worth, when in reality you are simply facing someone who hasn't learned how to show up emotionally. When a man ignores you without reason or pulls away without a conversation, it's not a mark of strength. It's a sign that he may not have the tools to process his own feelings, let alone share them with someone else. Silence is not a sign of depth if it lacks the courage to turn into dialogue. Strength is not about walking away without words. It's about having the maturity to say what needs to be said, even if it's hard. Emotional immaturity also often shows up as a lack of empathy. When someone disappears without explanation or ignores your efforts to communicate, they're not thinking about how that makes you feel. They're focused only on avoiding their own discomfort. And while their silence may leave you in emotional pain, they are primarily concerned with escaping any responsibility for that pain. That is not emotional strength. That is avoidance. That is immaturity. But understanding this truth can be incredibly freeing. Once you recognize that silence is often a coping mechanism for people who don't yet know how to deal with emotional complexity, you stop personalizing their behavior. You stop trying to decode their silence as if it's a puzzle you're supposed to solve, and you start realizing that their silence says more about their limitations than about your value. You also begin to understand that real strength in relationships is shown through openness, not withdrawal. Through directness, not disappearance. Through the courage to speak honestly, not the comfort of emotional hiding. And once you see that, you start demanding more, not in a desperate or confrontational way, but from a place of clarity and self-respect. You deserve someone who communicates even when it's hard, someone who doesn't leave you to fill in the blanks of their silence with your own insecurities, someone who doesn't choose immaturity when the relationship needs maturity most. So if a man is ignoring you, pulling away, going quiet, don't call it strength. See it for what it truly is, a sign of emotional immaturity, and let that realization be your permission to stop chasing silence and start choosing peace. Because your worth is not defined by how much noise you make trying to be heard, it's defined by your ability to walk away from what no longer honors your voice. People often think that when someone pulls away or distances themselves, it's a sign of indifference or lack of care. But the truth is far more complex. In many cases, people, especially men, retreat not because they don't feel anything, but because they feel too much. When emotions become overwhelming, when they feel exposed or out of control, retreating feels safer than facing what's really going on inside. People retreat when they feel powerless or exposed. Emotional exposure is uncomfortable. It forces a person to confront their fears, insecurities, and unresolved issues. For many men, especially those who have not been taught how to process or express emotions in a healthy way, this level of vulnerability can feel like a threat. So instead of leaning into the discomfort, they choose the path of least resistance, withdrawal. Imagine being in a relationship or connection where things are going well. There's affection, attention, even a level of intimacy, and suddenly the other person becomes distant. It feels abrupt and confusing. But for the person pulling away, it may not feel sudden at all. They might have been quietly overwhelmed for some time, unsure how to express what they were feeling, afraid of what might happen if they were fully seen. The fear of losing control, of being judged, or of not living up to expectations can cause someone to shut down emotionally. They retreat not to hurt you, but to protect themselves. This retreat is rarely about the other person. It's not about you being too much or not enough. It's about their inability to face something within themselves. It could be fear of commitment, fear of failure, fear of emotional intimacy, or simply a lack of emotional maturity to handle deeper connections. When they feel emotionally exposed, when their inner walls are at risk of being seen or broken down, the safest thing for them is to create space. Distance gives them room to breathe, even if that breathing comes at the expense of your peace. However, just because you understand the reason behind their retreat doesn't mean you have to tolerate it. Understanding can coexist with boundaries. Recognizing that someone is emotionally overwhelmed does not mean you need to wait in silence or endure confusion. Their feelings may be valid, but so are yours. You deserve clarity, communication, and consistency. If someone needs space, they should be able to express that, not disappear into emotional silence. What's important to realize is that emotional closeness requires a level of courage. It means staying present even when it's uncomfortable. It means choosing to communicate instead of running away. When someone retreats at the first sign of emotional depth, it reveals their readiness, or lack thereof, to be in a real, meaningful relationship. You can't build a strong connection with someone who constantly pulls back the moment things get real. Sometimes, when people feel exposed, it reminds them of old wounds, past rejections, childhood traumas, heartbreaks they never healed from. Rather than facing those emotions, they run from them, and sadly, in doing so, they may also run from the very person who cares about them the most. But no matter how much you care, you can't force someone to be emotionally brave. That's a decision they have to make for themselves. The key is to stop taking their retreat personally. Their emotional retreat is a mirror of their inner conflict, not a reflection of your shortcomings. You did not cause their fear. You did not trigger their past. You simply brought a level of closeness that they weren't ready to handle. And while that truth may be painful, it is also freeing. It frees you from the trap of overanalyzing. It frees you from the guilt of thinking you pushed them away. Most importantly, it frees you to make decisions that honor your emotional well-being. You don't need to chase someone who retreats. You need to stand firm in knowing that you deserve someone who stays. especially when things get real. Your value isn't defined by someone else's attention. This truth may sound simple, but it carries a powerful message, one that can transform the way you see yourself and how you navigate relationships. When a man starts ignoring you or becomes distant, it's easy to fall into the trap of self-doubt. You begin to wonder what went wrong, what you should have done differently, or how you could have made him stay. But all of these thoughts stem from one mistaken belief, that someone else's actions determine your worth. Let's be clear, attention is not the same as value. Just because someone chooses to ignore you doesn't mean you are any less deserving of love, respect, or care. Their decision to pull away says more about their capacity to connect than it does about your qualities as a person. Too often, people tie their self-esteem to the way others treat them, forgetting that human behavior is often driven by internal struggles that have little or nothing to do with you. A man might stop showing up because he is emotionally unavailable, confused, scared, or simply not ready. These are his issues, not yours, and yet the silence, the distance, the lack of explanation can all feel like a rejection. That's where the real danger lies, not in his retreat, but in what you begin to believe about yourself because of it. You may start to question your worth, your beauty, your intelligence, your presence, but none of these things are changed by his absence. Your worth is constant. It doesn't rise when someone loves you, and it doesn't fall when someone leaves you. You are not more valuable because someone is paying attention to you, and you are not less valuable because they stopped. That idea, that someone else must confirm your importance, is a lie that leads to emotional dependency. And dependency always leads to disappointment. When someone pulls away, it can trigger feelings of abandonment, especially if you've been hurt before. You may feel the urge to prove yourself, to chase after clarity, or to try harder just to get back that attention. But ask yourself, why should your value be up for negotiation every time someone withdraws? Why should your self-esteem hang in the balance of someone else's inconsistency? The truth is, the most powerful thing you can do when someone ignores you is to remain grounded in your own value. To remind yourself that your worth doesn't shrink because someone else couldn't see it clearly. Their inability to appreciate you doesn't make you less amazing. In fact, sometimes people walk away because they're intimidated by your strength, your clarity, or your emotional depth. And if someone isn't ready for who you are, that's not your burden to carry. It takes courage to stop seeking external validation. It takes even more strength to say, I am enough. Especially when someone you cared about made you feel otherwise. But that inner conviction, knowing that you don't need to earn love or attention to be valuable, is what will protect your peace and preserve your dignity. So the next time someone starts ignoring you or pulling away, don't automatically assume it's your fault. Don't shrink yourself to fit into their silence. Instead, pause and remember who you are. Remember what you bring to the table. Remember that someone's inability to love you the right way doesn't make you unlovable. Let their silence be a mirror, not a judgment. Let it reflect where they are, not who you are. And most importantly, let it remind you to always choose yourself. Because you were valuable before they noticed you, and you'll be valuable long after they're gone. ChatGPT said, rejection is painful. It can feel like a sudden loss, like a door being slammed shut without warning. When a man distances himself or begins to ignore you, the instinctive reaction is often to view it as personal. Something you did, something you lacked, or something you failed to be. But in truth, rejection is not always a punishment. In many cases, it's a powerful redirection. One that leads you back to yourself and toward the growth you didn't know you needed. When someone pulls away from you, it creates space. That space can be deeply uncomfortable. Silence, unanswered questions, and emotional confusion rush in to fill the void. But within that space is also an invitation to reflect, to rebuild, and to rise. Rejection can become the very thing that forces you to confront your own needs, to break old patterns and to strengthen your self-worth. It doesn't feel like a gift at first, but looking back, it often turns out to be one. Sometimes we become attached to people not because they're right for us, but because we crave connection, stability, or validation. We hold on even when the signs are telling us to let go. We try harder, compromise more, and hope that if we just give enough, they'll come back. But not all losses are meant to be reversed. Some are meant to reroute us, to show us that we've been settling or ignoring red flags or betraying parts of ourselves to keep someone else comfortable. Rejection interrupts that cycle. It pulls us out of emotional autopilot and forces us to see things more clearly. When someone distances themselves from you, especially without honest communication, it reveals not just their lack of readiness, but also how much you may have been relying on their presence to feel secure. That realization, though painful, is powerful. It teaches you that your security can't depend on someone who is unsure about you. Growth often comes from discomfort, and few things are more uncomfortable than feeling unwanted or unimportant. But if you sit with that discomfort instead of running from it, you begin to transform. You start to see where you were giving too much and receiving too little. You begin to understand your emotional patterns, why you chase, why you tolerate inconsistency, why you keep hoping someone will change. And then you start to shift. Slowly but surely, you begin to choose yourself more. This is how rejection becomes redirection. It moves you away from situations that were never meant to last and toward relationships that are based on mutual respect, effort, and emotional availability. It frees you from people who couldn't love you properly and makes room for those who can. But more importantly, it deepens your relationship with yourself. It reminds you that you are capable of healing, of standing alone, of building a life that doesn't depend on who stays or leaves. Too often, we chase closure from the very people who left us without explanation. We look to them to validate our pain or give us the clarity we crave. But the real closure comes when you stop needing answers and start creating peace for yourself. When you stop asking why they rejected you and start asking what you gained from their absence, let rejection be your teacher, not your enemy. Let it show you what you were blind to. Let it guide you back to your standards, your vision, your voice. Because every time someone walks away without honoring you, they make room for you to honor yourself even more. In the end, it's not about who left, it's about what you do with the space they left behind. Will you fill it with longing and regret, or will you fill it with purpose, growth, and self-love? That's the moment rejection becomes redirection. That's when you stop waiting to be chosen and start choosing yourself. Healing begins the moment you stop chasing after confusion and start embracing clarity. When a man distances himself from you and starts ignoring you, the natural response is often to seek answers. You want to understand why. You want to make sense of the silence, decode the change in behavior, and find some logic in the emotional chaos. But the truth is, the longer you chase closure from someone who isn't willing to give it, the further you move from your own healing. It's one of the most difficult lessons to learn in relationships. Closure isn't something someone gives you. It's something you create for yourself. If someone has chosen silence, inconsistency, or avoidance, that is your answer. Waiting for them to explain themselves, to suddenly become emotionally responsible, to finally say the words you need to hear. It only delays your healing. And the longer you stay in that waiting space, the more power you give to someone who's already chosen to step away from your life. Healing requires courage, the courage to sit with the pain, to feel the weight of unanswered questions, and to still choose to move forward. It requires you to stop begging for explanations that will never come, and start honoring what their actions have already shown you. You don't need more words, you need more self-trust. You need to believe what you see, not what you wish to hear. Many people think healing begins when someone apologizes, when they come back and admit they were wrong, or when they finally give closure. But if your peace depends on someone else's permission, you're handing your emotional well-being to a person who has already proven they don't know how to handle it. True healing is about reclaiming that power. It's about choosing yourself even in the absence of apologies or explanations. You begin to heal when you stop rewriting the story to make someone else's behavior easier to accept. When you stop saying, maybe he's just busy, or maybe he's afraid of love, and start saying, maybe I deserve someone who shows up without being asked. That shift in perspective is where healing truly begins. Healing also means taking accountability, not for their actions, but for your responses. You may not have caused the distance, but you are responsible for how long you choose to stay affected by it. Are you still checking your phone, waiting for a text that never comes? Are you replaying old conversations, looking for hidden meanings? That mental and emotional loop keeps you stuck in a place where your past continues to control your present. Breaking that cycle is an act of self-love. It's not easy, but it's necessary. Start by choosing silence over chasing. Choose stillness over overthinking. Choose acceptance over questioning. These are small, quiet choices that slowly lead you out of the pain and into your power. And healing doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you erase the memories or pretend it didn't hurt. It means you learn to live with the pain without letting it define you. It means you take the lesson without carrying the wound. It means you stop waiting for someone else to complete a chapter that you have the strength to close on your own. When you shift from chasing closure to creating it, something beautiful happens. You become your own source of peace. You stop depending on others to validate your experience. You stop needing someone else's presence to feel whole. You realize that healing isn't about forgetting them, it's about remembering yourself. So don't wait for them to come back and make it right. Don't lose more sleep over someone who chose to walk away. Instead, choose your healing. Choose your future. Choose the peace that comes not from answers, but from letting go of the need to ask. That's the real closure. That's where freedom begins.